I had a patient who was doing everything right. The planner, the apps, the early mornings, and they still felt like they were failing every single day. That's when I told them something that completely changed how they saw themselves. The problem wasn't them, it was the advice. Because most productivity advice assumes that your brain works in a certain way, and ADHD brains don't. ADHD isn't an effort problem, it's a regulation problem. And if you treat it like an effort problem, you'll keep feeling stuck no matter how hard you try. So in this video, I'm breaking down 5 productivity hacks that sound helpful, but quietly backfire for ADHD brains. And who am I to say the advice you've been following might be the reason that you're actually stuck? My name is Dr. Salman Aziz Mirza, triple board certified in adult psychiatry, child and adolescent psychiatry, and addiction medicine. And let's start by throwing that fancy planner out the window. Let's start with the big one, the fancy planner. And the appeal makes complete sense. A new planner feels like control, like a reset, like this time things are finally going to stick. So you buy it, you set it up, you use it for a couple days, and then it disappears. Not all at once, just slowly, quietly. Not because you didn't care, not because you weren't trying, but because a planner is a storage device, not a motor. It can hold a plan, but it can't give you the executive function to open it in the first place. And for ADHD brains, that's the actual problem. Initiation, getting started. The planner assumes you already have the fuel, but it just gives you somewhere to write down where you're going. But ADHD is a dopamine-driven initiation problem. Your brain isn't holding out on you, it's struggling to generate the startup signal most people take for granted. And no planner fixes that. So the planner sits there, full of good intentions, and never gets touched. And this is where it starts to do real damage. Because every abandoned planner becomes evidence. Evidence that you're disorganized, that you can't follow through, that you're the problem. And that builds shame. And shame increases avoidance. And avoidance makes ADHD harder to manage. So the very tool that was supposed to help ends up feeding the cycle. What actually works instead is much simpler. Don't plan the whole day. Pick one task, just one, and define only the first physical step. Not work on the report. Instead, say, open the document. And that's it. The entry point, not the entire plan. Because for an ADHD brain, the smaller the ask, the more likely it actually starts. You've probably seen this one all over your feed. Dopamine detox. No phone, no music, no stimulation. Just sit there and reset your brain. The idea sounds convincing. You've overloaded your dopamine system, so if you cut everything out, it just resets, and suddenly normal life feels rewarding again. It sounds scientific, which is exactly why it spreads so easily. It also has almost nothing to do with how dopamine actually works. Dopamine is not a toxin. You cannot detox from it. It's a survival chemical. Your brain uses it to move, to focus, to feel motivated, to function overall. And this is where it really matters for ADHD. ADHD is not an overstimulation problem, it's an understimulation problem. Your baseline dopamine is already low. So when you cut stimulation, you're not resetting anything, you're removing one of the only things helping your brain engage in the first place. You're not fixing the problem, you're making it worse. The origin of this idea is actually really misunderstood. The term dopamine fasting was coined in 2019, but not as a literal detox. It was a behavioral strategy based on cognitive behavioral therapy, focused on reducing specific compulsive behaviors. Social media stripped out the science, but kept the name. So, what actually works? Don't eliminate stimulation, guide it. Pair a boring task with something mildly engaging, something like a playlist, a different environment, a body double. You're not detoxing your brain, you're giving it just enough dopamine to get started. And that's a completely different strategy. The 5 a.m. routine has been everywhere for years. Wake up early, get ahead of the day, prove that you have discipline. Productivity culture turned early rising into a kind of moral virtue. And on the surface, it's appealing. No distractions, no notifications, just quiet, focused time before the world wakes up. But for a lot of ADHD brains, forcing a 5 a.m. wake up isn't discipline, it's biological warfare. Because ADHD is strongly linked to something called delayed sleep phase. Your brain's internal clock runs later. You ever notice how you're a night owl? Yeah, that's what that is. This isn't mindset, it isn't laziness, it's neurology. Which means that your brain often isn't fully online in the early morning, no matter how early you force yourself out of bed. So what actually happens? You wake up earlier and your brain just isn't there. And over time, that turns into chronic sleep deprivation, which matters because sleep deprivation creates symptoms that look almost identical to ADHD. Poor focus, emotional dysregulation, impulsivity, and forgetfulness. So now you're trying to fix your ADHD by recreating it, which is a frustrating place to be. And when the routine falls apart after a few days, which it usually does, people don't blame the system, they blame themselves. But this is exactly what Dr. Russell Barkley talks about. ADHD isn't a disorder of knowing what to do, it's a disorder of doing what you know. And sleep deprivation makes that gap much worse. So instead of forcing a schedule that fights your biology, track your natural energy for 3 days. Don't change anything, just observe. When do you feel the sharpest? What does focus come more easily? That window, whatever time it is your actual productivity peak. That's where your hardest work should go, not where a morning routine video says it should. This one feels almost too logical to question. ADHD medications are stimulants. Caffeine is a stimulant. So more caffeine should mean more focus, right? Let's pump the brakes, Lewis Hamilton. Caffeine can help a little. It gives a small dopamine boost, and for some people with ADHD, that can slightly improve alertness. But that's about where the benefit ends. Because caffeine isn't targeted. It doesn't regulate the prefrontal cortex the way ADHD medications are designed to. The dopamine effect is weaker, less precise, and much shorter lived. What caffeine does hit hard is your body, heart rate, jitters, tension. Meanwhile, the part you actually need for focus barely moves, which is the part you actually care about. And then comes the crash. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine, the chemical that builds up and tells your brain it's tired. But when the caffeine wears off, that adenosine comes rushing back, often stronger than before. So the fatigue hits harder. And for an ADHD brain that's already low on dopamine, that crash can feel like hitting a wall. Now, add this on top. If you're already taking stimulant medication, stacking caffeine doesn't double your focus, it doubles your side effects. More anxiety, worse sleep, more irritability. And then poor sleep makes ADHD worse, which makes you reach for more caffeine, which makes sleep worse again. And guess what? That loop builds on itself. So what actually works? Cap your caffeine before noon and actually track what happens. Not how it feels in the moment, but how your focus and energy look later in the day. Because for most ADHD brains, less caffeine plus better sleep consistently outperforms more caffeine. The cup feels like a solution, but most of the time it's just borrowing from tomorrow. The last one is the most surprising because it actually works, just not for long, and not for the reason people think. The idea is simple. Turn your task into a game, earn points, build streaks, level up. Apps like Habatica make this feel genuinely fun. And at first, it is. You get the little reward sound. Ding! The progress bar moves. It finally feels like something is clicking. But then, almost overnight, it stops working. And that drop-off isn't random. It's neurological. ADHD brains are wired to chase novelty. That's how the dopamine system works. But the moment something becomes predictable, the dopamine response drops. And fast. Usually within a couple of days. So the reward that felt exciting at first turns into background noise. The points stop meaning anything. The system stops pulling you in. And now you're left with the same task, plus one more thing that didn't stick. And that matters because now it's not just a task you're avoiding, it's another piece of evidence. Another system that worked for other people, but didn't work for you. And that's how the cycle builds. There's also a deeper issue here. Gamification outsources your motivation, which feels good in the moment, but doesn't last. The app becomes the thing pushing you to start, which feels helpful, but it doesn't build anything that transfers outside the app. And if you make the system more complex, more habits, more rules, more tracking, well, now you've created something that requires executive function to manage your executive function, which brings you right back to where you started. So, what actually works? Don't gamify the task, minimize it. Strip it down to the smallest possible entry point. 2 minutes, 1 step, whatever, no system required, because the goal isn't to make the task exciting, it's to make it so small that starting feels easier than avoiding it. Every single hack on this list assumes the same thing, that the problem is effort. So the solution becomes try harder, wake up earlier, cut more out, add more structure. But ADHD doesn't work that way. It's not an effort problem. It's a regulation problem. And when you treat a regulation problem like an effort problem, you don't just stay stuck, you start to believe you're the reason nothing works. But you're not. The advice was built for a different brain. And once you see that, you can stop trying to force yourself into systems that were never designed for you. And start building ones that actually work with your brain instead of against it. If any of these hit a little too close to home, let me know in the comments below which ones that you've tried. I've done a bunch of them. And for more on that whole dopamine detox BS, make sure to check out the video linked below. Till next time, be safe and be well.